Welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark through the magic of television. We're going to join by an author and an editor of a book. Katherine Daniels is the editor of a book written by her late husband, Robin Daniels, author of The Virgin Eye Towards a Contemplative View of Life. And Katherine is coming to us through the magic of television from the Journey Home Studios. And welcome, Katherine, to EWTN's Bookmark. It's great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Doug. It's good to be here.
Now, it's great. Now, you're up in the studios there for a very important reason. You were recently just interviewed by our good friend Marcus Grodi for The Journey Home because you and your late husband were both converts, right?
That's right. Yes, we came into the Catholic Church in 2011 after Pope Benedict visited the UK.
Okay. And the book itself came out in what, 2012-ish? Is that around the time that the book first came out?
No, Robin died in 2012, December 2012,
Right.
of bronchopneumonia. And the book came out about 2 years later. I set down my job and edited it, and it came out last October,
Okay.
2016.
Okay, now as far as the book itself, now it was written by your late husband. What role did you play as editor in the final version we have today?
Well, it was mainly a question of reducing the size so that it would be a size that a commercial publisher could take on. And so to do that, it was a question of just getting really, really familiar with the text and seeing if there were any things that he'd said the same thing twice, so repetitions, the odd quotes, and I added the subheadings, and I moved the prayers, so you now have some prayers at the end of each chapter. So it was more like it's his words, but a bit of moving, and yeah, that's
Okay.
that was my main contribution.
And what was, now, so when the book was originally done, and I know there's some dates going back to like '06 in reference to this book being put together that Robin was working on, how involved were you with the original version, meaning when Robin started writing this book, was this something you were intimately involved with, or was this something that he normally did? What did he normally do for a living?
Well, he was a writer and a Jungian analyst, so I wasn't involved in any of the writing, but we had great conversations. And there's the odd thing in there where I think, oh, I see my influence. You know, if it's an anecdote about children, because I'm a play therapist, I work with children, and certainly there's a lovely chapter on marriage, which I think comes from both the idealism of his bachelor years and his long wait, but also from a happy marriage.
Right. Okay. Now, as far as the book itself and the title, it's a kind of unusual name, The Virgin Eye Towards a Contemplative View of Life, and there's a beautiful, I think it's Claude Monet, picture on the front. Are those two related to one another?
Well, it's called The Virgin Eye because it's about seeing things with a purity, with innocence, as if for the first time. So it could very well have been called The Poet's Eye or The Child's Eye, because children have that sense of wonder. I mean, there's a little quote in the book, it says, "Wonder anoints the eye with innocence." So Robin's encouraging us to slow down, to be open, to not categorize or judge or consume what we see or who we see, and have that sort of freshness of perception that an artist has. Mm-hmm. So Monet was chosen, I chose the cover, it's Claude Monet caught in the act of seeing. So, you know, we can imagine what a rich sense of beauty Monet must have had. And right. As Robin says in the book, when we're admiring the work of an artist, it's not first the gift of expression that we should appreciate. It's what predates their gift of communication is the way they see.
Well, it's interesting.
Monet captured it, yeah.
In reading that, in the sense of the kind of the virgin connection, he talks about, in a sense, a journey in the book, and also the idea of, in a sense, of the virgin soul, in the sense of us finding our time to contemplate the areas of our soul we're yet to discover. Is that a big part of what's behind this book?
Yes, I think there's a D.H. Lawrence quote there that there are sort of uncharted territories of the soul that we have yet to discover.
Right.
And a sense maybe that we can, through prayer, recover some of that pristine innocence. That contemplation is the sort of balm that washes our eye.
Right.
That there's not only a virgin eye in the sense of seeing, but there's also an innocent self somewhere in the core that has often become muddied and murked by life, but that's recoverable in a certain sense.
Okay. Now, also, I noticed he dedicated the book to you, and he wrote about who does with grace what I just write about. What is it, do you think he meant by that?
I don't think it's true, but I didn't think I could edit that out because it is touching. I think that was the idealism of a man who's just fallen in love, to be honest, and also more. It should tell you more about his humility than anything about his wife.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe he just had a great sense of how to appreciate, just like he appreciated fine art and things like that. He had a great appreciation. You know, in the foreword of the book, talk about the parts of this book are very simple and obvious, though are also very difficult to achieve. Is that the conundrum we're faced with in life, that in some ways things are simple and obvious, but trying to accomplish them are quite difficult?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like, you know, he's one of the things is about being very careful about our tongue, you know, what we say, whether we're discreet, gentle to people, but we all know how difficult that is to put in practice. And I know Robin did. I mean, in 6.5 years of marriage, I didn't hear him say an indiscreet word about others or an irritable word to me. But so it's easy to say, it's a wonderful thing to have control of your tongue, but to actually master that, I think it's unusual. Or to give you another example, you know, it keeps up coming up in the book, you know, that God's within us. And I suppose I would sign up to that as something I believe in, but to make that journey from the head to the heart, that God really dwells within me, to have that vivid sense, and that he really dwells in other people, including the people I find difficult. Those are hard things to really realize, aren't they?
Now, also in the book here, in the beginning you say, on almost every page there are profound insights, and if that were not enough, there is an extraordinary richness of quotation. And this is actually the foreword that was written by a sister, Wendy Beckett. So first of all, is it very British and English to have so many quotations? It's kind of interesting. In reading the book, you get that sense. At the same time, I was wondering, who's Sister Wendy Beckett?
Well, Sister Wendy Beckett is the BBC's art nun. She's a hermit and she lives in a Carmelite monastery in Quiddenham. But very unusually, she got called out of her seclusion. I don't think she loves doing it, but she goes to all these art galleries around the world and makes programs about art. So she's an art critic as well as a contemplative
So she is
hermit.
the one we would know as Sister Wendy that we all heard about for many, many years.
She's the one, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
very good.
And to answer your other question about the quotes, yeah, I would say Robin was a wordsmith. He just loved poetry. So he was also a voracious reader. He had an extremely adventurous reading life. So I think he just immersed himself in the poets and philosophers and
Now it's interesting too.
Prose writers and.
It's interesting too because though I kind of throw in that the English flair, obviously, but he was actually. His mother was American, right? And he was actually raised for a period of time out on the West Coast, during World War II?
He was born during World War II, and then they came over to Rye, New York, to American Granny and Granddad. And he had really happy childhood memories there, yeah. And then Dad came back from fighting the war in Burma, and they lived near the Golden Gate Park in California. And so his first game was baseball. He had an American accent. He Yeah, and he just loved America. You know, it was in fact, I think probably one of his greatest childhood sorrows was coming back from the freedom of America, co-education, sunshine, back to British post-war rationing and, you know, quite a heavy, constricted post-war atmosphere.
Do you think that because he did have that American experience, that impacted the way he viewed his life in general?
Sure. I mean, I saw it, well, it was there in his role models. I mean, he loved Kennedy, but I think there's that sort of ease and openness in Americans. Like, I think it was most evident in what he would describe as joshing, you know, like the way he would just get into chats with people in the street and take time to engage with shopkeepers and that sort of easy openness with people who were doing some kind of service, and also not cynical. Sort of expecting the best of people, appreciative.
Right. Well, you talk about that. You said Robin looked out for and appreciated the good and beautiful things of life. Then you said he was an extraordinarily single-pointed person. What do you mean by that?
He was focused. So because he was a writer primarily, you know, all his attention was on that. So he wasn't like what we would say in England, a clubbable man. He didn't do the dinner party circuit. He was really something of an urban hermit, I think. Not a vowed hermit, but, you know, sort of. So I would say that the life of prayer and the interior life, he thought required a great deal of privacy. And as did writing. He thought if you sort of talked about your book too much, you would sort of lose some of the focus. So, you know, he did one thing and all his focus went towards that, and therefore he did it well. And he did it slowly, but he was immensely productive.
Right, it's interesting because you say that because you also say when asked what he'd like somebody to pray for him about, he would say just to be more grateful. And I guess, in a sense, grateful and humility are tied in together. Yeah,
that's an interesting thought. Yes, because I suppose if you're grateful to God, you're seeing that any good thing as coming from Him and including any of your own gifts.
Right.
So, yeah, he was immensely grateful. He would say, you know, I'm always thanking God for you, Katherine. And we would have a little walk at the end of the day and we would trade things that we were grateful for. And they weren't big things, you know, it might be just finding a good, some nice plums in the supermarket or some, you know, having a good GP. That means, you know, a general practitioner, doctor. Yeah. So he noticed little things and thanked God for them.
Now, he also talked about something called wholehearted living. What did he mean by that?
He talked about, live full out. So he savoured. He didn't cram things in. If you'd been meeting him, he wouldn't have crammed in another appointment before or after, but he would have relished that encounter. Or if he was listening to Kathleen Ferrier or Beethoven's violin concerto, it would have all his attention. Or he was walking, you know, he would see a leaf and he would appreciate all the beauty of that leaf. So I think it was something to do with his being very present moment focused and appreciative and just this slightly childlike, maybe slightly simple wonder and relish of his experience.
You also go to say here that in his life, God is best approached elusively, not as an engineer, but as an artist. Okay, so sometimes I think we Americans would tend to probably do the engineer approach. That's kind of our fix it, get things done. What is he trying to point out when he talks about but as an artist?
Well, I don't think it's just you Americans. I think it's a Western thing, maybe. I think he means like not too much with the left hemisphere of the brain, not categorizing trying to reason everything out, pin it all down. He had a very rich aesthetic life and loved music and poetry and art. So definitely saw the spiritual life as on a continuum with the life of appreciating beauty. So it's something about beauty as a way into the life of God. It's also something about not straining and striving, so just a sort of receptive waiting, not being greedy, not sort of expecting high soaring experiences from our prayer life, sort of living gently, not manipulating, not trying to manipulate God to deliver on our wishes, but a sort of openness to receive that I certainly have a long way to learn. Yeah.
You and the rest of us as well. Also goes on to point out, he said, we shall be guided and accompanied along the way, because again, he talked about this as a journey by the saints of the past and present. And then he goes on to say, our mentors say the journey has been made, the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life. That's Matthew 7:14. But we have traveled it. You can too. We're counting on you to join us now. You must. So was that an inspiration for him? Is that something that he found even more inspiration in as he became a Catholic? Because most of the book was written before he became a Catholic, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you pick up on that phrase. You see, he wrote that before he became a Catholic, and it kind of embodies why he became a Catholic, because that was already his view. You know, he was pretty much a solitary, who's maybe St. Francis de Sales, one of his best spiritual friends, his mentor and encourager. So they were the hinterland he inhabited, and I would say he definitely had a rich sense of the communion of saints that predated his entering the Catholic Church. Yeah.
Now, also, I noticed in the book itself, with the intention of the writing of the book, it's even pointed out that obviously, since most of the book was written before I became Catholic, it can be viewed generically Christian, but I know there's even not an attempt even to talk about the triune God specifically, because the goal was to make this accessible for anyone who, I guess, is in search of God from wherever they may be at this point in their spiritual walk, correct?
Right, yeah. So, I mean, it is Christological. You know, you can sense Jesus on every page. But his language is more God. It's less Trinitarian language. And that was intentional. So that, say, I mean, I'll give you an example. My very dear history teacher, who's Jewish, you know, I gave him the book and he loves it, you know. So similarly, you know, somebody who's just seeking and interested in psychology and self-help, he loves it. So I think it's the kind of book that you can give to your friends who are seeking on the margins, maybe a bit confused, maybe even a Muslim friend. They will find Christ in there, but he's gently there. He's not blasting out of every page, but the spirituality is very, very Christian.
Right.
But it's intended to be quite accessible.
Right. Also,
so I would say.
Go ahead.
I'd say the primary readership is probably people who are quite serious about their spiritual life and are prepared to put the work in, and probably with a contemplative bent, you know, the type who like the Cloud of Unknowing or Brother Lawrence, or St. Francis de Sales and the Carmelites, but it's certainly accessible to people of all denominations, and I think for people who are just sort of seeking and self-helpy, you know, that it might be their way in to something that's a bit more nourishing. Right.
In a lot of ways, it's taking in the beauty of the world as a reflection of our Lord and God. I know the Evidential Power of Beauty, a great book by the late great Father Thomas Dubay, who had pointed that out as well. Now, in the foreword as well, I wanted to go back to this because I thought it was an interesting quote by Sister Wendy. She said, "For me, the heart of the book is the small paragraph about halfway through in which Robin Daniels describes St. Therese, sick, lonely, and suffering, scratching on her cell wall, 'Jesus is my only love. I say this is the heart of the book for me.' But it is a hidden heart. The presence of Christ, as you were talking about, is all pervasive, but hardly ever explicit." And that's exactly what you were just talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's all there, but it doesn't just necessarily jump out at you and allow somebody to read through. And this book is fairly substantial. Was there a reason why Robin wanted it to be as substantial as it is, as opposed to these days writing something that may be shorter and briefer, that maybe was broken up into a couple of different volumes?
I know he thought that some repetition was important, that for people to get it, but I also think he just loved great poetry, and if he found a good Matthew Arnold quote, he just couldn't resist putting it in. So they're like sort of sequins, I think, that are sewn on to augment his point, but also because he's writing so much about things that are invisible, intangible, ungraspable. He's writing about the experience of God, and we can't put that into words. So some of the people that come closest are the poets. So I think that's why he's used the poets a lot. And to go back to your earlier point about the Sister Wendy Beckett, say he will use a poet to say something like, love uncurtained heaven to let thee live. I can't remember which poet that is, but that's obviously Jesus becoming incarnate, going to the cross to save us. So he's using the poets to get across these very deep perennial truths. Yeah.
Right, and when you use poetry, and you mentioned poets, you're also talking about Shakespeare obviously here as well. And I know there's a quote here from Two Gentlemen in Verona near the beginning of the book. Proteus warns us that we are on a slippery slope from our very first detour or deviation from absolute truth and rectitude. And I think that's the kind of thing sometimes a lot of people lose sight of today. They think, well, I'm generally doing okay. But it's when you make that first detour or deviation that you set yourself up. And he really talks about, and he talks about in this book, the idea that he's really pursuing that absolute pure truth, right?
Yeah. Robin set the standard high. If there's another quote, it says something, nowhere on the citadel of truth will you find written the word compromise. So his standards for himself were high, but I would say that there was a gentleness that he probably learned. I'm guessing. I doubt he maybe had that all along. But his own personal standards, in terms of reliability, I've mentioned control of the tongue, delivering on what he said he would do. He was immensely disciplined in his diet as well. He basically ate one meal a day. I didn't join him in that, by the way. But he was seriously disciplined. But he never told people that. So I'm telling you now. But people didn't know that because he felt that those sort of things should be hidden. Otherwise, pride would creep in and distort the motivation, and it would all be lost anyway. Right.
That's a good point. And then people would question how valid it actually was. You also talk about here, and I was thinking about the book in the sense of you working on it, and what kind of insights did you get spiritually, perhaps, and were there any insights into your husband that you got in working on his text?
I think the main thing that I got from it was something he'd said already, which was, it's not just about your 2 quiet times of the day. It's about life as prayer. And a sense of how he lived that, because obviously he didn't talk about that. So what did that mean? It meant, he talks about, the arrow prayers that we know from St. Alphonsus de Liguori. He talks about praying before encounters, when you get up, before meals, after meals, during transitions. Those sort of little event-led opportunities to be recollected. And he talks about praying. He says, St. Paul asks us to pray all the time, but we have to work, we have to eat, we have to sleep. So how can we do that? And I think probably the one nugget I've kind of tried to carry around with me is, he says, whether you're filing or clearing your in tray or sweeping the path of leaves, do that as an offering. Say that this is for thee, Lord. I'm doing this for love of you. And just this habit of pausing. I saw that in him. He would pause in the middle of a decent movie. He would take his time at the checkout. He would pause between courses before the fruit. But that sense of pausing to notice, or pausing to glance at God, or pausing to ask God to bless the work, or to offer it to Him. So I learnt that from the book.
Right.
That's sort of recollected.
Well, we thank you so much, Katherine, for joining us today and for taking the time to make your husband's work known to the world. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining the church and bringing what you and Robin have brought to enhancing the Catholic faith. Thank you so much, and good luck with the book, and hopefully get it out there. And thank you so much for also being on the journey home. It's great to have spent some time with you. Again, our editor has been Katherine Daniels, who, along with Robin Daniels, he was her late husband, was the author of The Virgin Eye Towards a Contemplative View of Life. Very interesting book, available through the website www.kregl.com/the-virgin-eye. And thank you so much for joining us for the special On Location Bookmark. Join us next time right here on EWTN. Thanks.